Hey there! Welcome to SkyGems Academy podcast. At SkyGems Academy, our vision is to build a community of new generation leaders with strong core values, high level of self-awareness, high self-worth, and passionate individuals who will give back to the community and the environment. We are focused on delivering high-quality blended online learning of 21st century life skills delivered and taught online, practiced and perfected offline. Our philosophy is to inspire, educate, and nurture. We work towards inspiring and igniting sparks. We listen, we coach, we fine-tune and accelerate the mastery of 21st century life skills for various age groups. Our blended learning programs are curated from the early years to above 60 years old, as we believe in providing high-quality, lifelong learning for everyone. SkyGems Academy Podcast Series 1: How COVID-19 Transformed the Education Industry. We will take you inside the minds and behind the scenes of 40 exclusive leaders and educators in the education industry. We've interviewed 40 exclusive educators and leaders in the education industry worldwide, starting with China, where the pandemic initially started. You will hear from the leaders in the education industry sharing candidly their views on the possible changes that will take place in the education industry post-COVID-19. Be sure to tune in to SkyGems Academy Podcast Series 1 to listen and learn from the amazing stories, experiences shared, challenges faced, and techniques used by educators in different cities and countries to adapt and overcome their challenges personally as well as professionally in their respective roles in the education industry during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, let's dive into SkyGems Academy Podcast Series 1. Introducing to you our host, Alyssa.
Hey guys, it's Alyssa. Hope everyone is keeping well. SkyGems Academy Podcast is a passion project that my team and I kicked off in early 2020. As we are all facing the unprecedented events and experiences impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, we find that there is an urgent need to unite the global community of educators and leaders to progress forward together. Our main objective is to create a platform for all global leaders and global communities to come together to document these historic moments for our future generations. SkyGems Academy Podcast is a platform for everyone from all around the world to share, listen, learn, communicate, collaborate, and come together to network and help one another to pull through this very challenging period that has impacted the global community. In each episode of SkyGems Academy Podcast Series 1, How COVID-19 Transformed the Education Industry, you will find yourself immersed and engaged in in-depth discussions and thought leadership in various aspects of education, technology, humanity, diversity, disparity, and collaborations in the education space. We are very grateful and sincerely appreciate each and every one of you who has motivated us, encouraged us, contributed in your own very special ways, especially our 40 exclusive guest speakers from all around the world. A big thank you to all, and a big shout out to all of you. SkyGems Academy Podcast 22nd speaker is Damian Rentoule. Hiroshima International School, Japan, principal and author of Conversations for a Global Child. Damian has been supporting families with the education of their children across 4 countries for over 20 years. Damian has a PhD in education and an interest in the way everyday conversations affect our sense of identity. Originally from Australia, Damian enjoys reading in quiet time and surfing whenever he gets the chance. Damian is an author, and a special shout out to Damian's website at www.damianrentoule.com. The connection between the school and the others as the support network has significantly changed. It is really important to have collective resilience, said Damian Rentoule. Now, I am pleased to introduce you to Damian Rentoule.
Today, in a very early morning in Singapore and Japan, we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Hiroshima, Japan. A very good morning to you, Damian. A very warm welcome to SkyGems podcast. Hi, Damian. How are you doing today?
Oh, very well, thank you. Thanks for arranging the podcast.
Thank you, Damian. Really nice to have you all the way from Hiroshima, Japan. I'd like to hand over to you to give you the floor for you to introduce yourself to the listeners today. Over to you, Damian.
Yes, I'm Damian Rentoule. I'm the principal of Hiroshima International School, which is one of approximately 28 international schools in Japan. So we're down in Hiroshima, if you've ever been down here, kind of a famous landmark in Japan for many reasons. And currently the situation, because we're going to be talking a little bit about the COVID, is relatively calm at the moment.
Welcome, Damian, to the show. Thank you for your introduction. And you just nicely said about the situation that we are all in right now during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm glad to hear things are calming down in Japan, or Hiroshima, Japan specifically. Not so much in some parts of the world. So I'm glad to hear that. I'd like to ask for your view, Damian, and also how do you feel about the COVID-19 pandemic that has really rocked the world since January and actually caused a lot of chaos around the world? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, so it was a great question, actually. I know you shared this with me earlier. So,
Yeah.
And how do I feel? So interesting in terms of introspection. Having been dealing with this for months and months, I don't know if I had stopped to think about how I actually felt about the whole situation. So I guess to sum it up at this stage, and of course now, as I mentioned earlier, Hiroshima is relatively calm. We have students kind of starting back at school now. And I would say that I was feeling, relatively hopeful in our, collective resilience as a society around the world. Lots of things have been happening that I never thought would have been possible or never would have considered. Like, for example, the closure of schools across Japan and closure of flights, etc. So I guess I'm hopeful in the sense that in a kind of a global effort, we've been able to kind of orchestrate some, kind of pretty widespread responses to this. But on the other hand, of course, feeling a little bit anxious that we, I guess maybe as a society, relying on our ability to kind of problem solve these issues as they come up rather than, having a look at some of the key kind of sources to the problems, etc. But anyway, I've been overall hopeful that we, in our resilience, particularly, looking at education across the world and how schools have adapted to really different conditions that we wouldn't have even thought possible in December.
That is true. I think overall, the agility and adaptability of our human race has actually credibly shown throughout the pandemic how we all collectively stand united and stay united and resilient to actually go beyond what we normally do to actually adapt and also fight throughout this pandemic to stay alive and also stay ahead of the curve. So I think that is remarkable what we have done as a collective community.
Yes, and like you said before, some places have been a little bit more kind of cohesive than others in their response. Yeah. So I think we could probably learn from that as well.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts and your feelings about the pandemic so far, Damian. That actually brings me to the next question, where I thought, going through what you have gone through, there are bound to be challenges that you have faced. Would you be able to share with us some of the challenges that you have faced during this period?
Yes, I think, I guess as a school principal, the main challenge has been that decision-making, I guess, with trying to filter information. And I think probably an indication of where we are as a society at the moment, anyway, particularly with our social media and access to like large amounts of information, but also large amounts of information of dubious origin. And I think, people being kind of overwhelmed with information without being able, I guess, having the time to, evaluate it properly, which comes kind of back to, I guess, what we do in schools and trying to develop, critical literacy, etc. So I think that's for our students. So I guess for myself and the group of heads of school actually across Japan, we've been meeting via Zoom weekly, actually talking about our responses and what each school's doing. So that's, I guess, filtering that information, that huge amount of information that's coming in, and then trying to react to that in a rational way rather than kind of an emotional way. I guess one of the biggest challenges because of the huge onslaught of information, and it's all very emotionally charged, particularly with a virus like this, where you're talking about people, children, adults, potentially dying. So it's the stakes are very high, and the information very disparate and difficult to wade through, I guess, and make good decisions. So I think that would have been the biggest challenge, more information based, and I think it will be the same in other situations we face in the future.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, so much information and it really overwhelming sometimes. How do you then adapt to those challenges that you come across, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, I think in this particular case, and probably in terms of the change that has adapted, I guess the degree of collaboration between international schools in Japan was one kind of big change that happened. Like I said, we're the heads of school, there's 28 schools, so we've been usually maybe over 20 of the heads of school of the international schools have been meeting weekly. Everyone has kind of different sources of information, and we have been trying to generate some coherence with our responses. We all operate independently, but knowing what everyone else is doing has been a good way to, stabilize some of our reactions, particularly with potential school closures and opening procedures, etc. So I guess particularly in Hiroshima International School, we're one of the two non-schools that run the Japanese national curriculum. So we're kind of a little bit isolated in that sense. So I guess with the wider support needed from the group was a big change that happened. I guess the connection between this school and the others as a support network was a significant change, I think, and really important. And it kind of just goes to show that initial, what I said, in feeling hopeful about collective resilience. I think a lot of people have been working together in ways that they haven't been before just because of the need. So yeah, that's been a really positive change, and one I think that's going to probably continue or change the way that we operate into the future.
Yeah, I think that's just going to grow into a bigger collaboration within team members, within community, and also ideally across the globe too. So I think the mindset has shifted and the way we work has also changed. So I think people are more open-minded and willing to do that, right? And I think more so than previously. And also I find the proactiveness in engaging people across different culture, different community, just to achieve positive progress as a whole. I think that is what I see going around the world lately. So, and I'm very pleased to see that.
Yes, definitely.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Damian, for sharing. Damian, you shared about the challenges faced, the changes, and how you adapt to them and how you overcome those challenges. What about lessons learned? Would you be able to share any lessons that you have learned so far?
Yeah, it seems like there's some kind of really old lessons that we're kind of learning anew. And I just mentioned the importance of kind of collaboration, but also, kind of different administration teams and, for example, for parents who have had to take a much more central role in the education of their children, with distance learning and have done that really well, actually. And so I think the kind of a lessons learned, I think it's reinforced the fact that, we're all learners. What we do at school, we talk about, students at school with their learning, but, all of us are on this continual learning journey. Yeah, my school's an international baccalaureate school. We have the kind of IB programs, and I guess one of the central kind of tenets of the model is that process is really important, and the type of learners that are being developed is really important. So I guess the lesson, and I said before, it was kind of an old one, that the type of learner that we're trying to develop in those students is just as important as, for the teachers, the administration staff, the parents. We're trying to be caring learners, looking after each other, I guess, in times like this, trying to be kind of critical thinkers. And so all of those skills that the students are developing, also it's kind of highlighted the need for, us, the adults involved in that, to also, really keep an open mind and make sure that we're, developing those skills as well. And I think particularly the thinking skills associated with critical literacy. I think sometimes as adults, we, if we're focusing on content, we can forget that those critical literacy skills are so important, trying to decipher and evaluate all that information we're inundated with. So that's, I guess, the big lesson learned is that, we need to continue to learn as individuals, and our schools need to be learning organizations. And I think if you kind of expanded that into society, We really do need to learn kind of from this. And take those lessons with us. So, if a school can be a learning organisation, I think wider society also can operate in that way. But definitely keep learning, I think, and definitely don't forget the lessons from this catastrophe, which is still ongoing, of course. Particularly with other environmental things, etc., happening around the world. And we've had some recent serious kind of flooding and landslides and weather-related issues that seem to be becoming more and more serious. So there's disasters that we're having to deal with, probably not going to get any better in the near future, I guess.
It is, isn't it? I think what you said all, hit it on the nail. But what I appreciate most is the lifelong learning journey that we all have to go through. And every single crisis that we go through, or pandemic that we go through, or every challenges that we go through, I think the key takeaway from each of that is the lessons learned, and remember them. And that will shape you as a person moving forward. So very well said there. Thank you. Thank you so much. Damian, we are all in the education industry, and we find that with the COVID-19 that hit us all so suddenly, there's a big shift and knee-jerk reaction that we have to take to cope and adapt during this pandemic. What are the changes that was happening within your organization during the COVID-19, and how did it change the way you guys work? At the same time, what do you think the future may be for the education industry post-COVID-19?
Yes, that is a really good one, because particularly schools and education systems, I think historically very resistant to change, right? So how will we bounce back from this, and will things go back to the historical norm in many schools? So I guess in one way, and looking at the Japanese example, the Japanese public schools, for example, were very, unprepared for any sort of virtual interactions. There very little technology was used in schools, etc. Schools didn't have, students didn't have email addresses. There was lots of so I think in Japan, as an example, there has been a big focus on improving that. Of course, short term, it's quite difficult, but I think that this particular case will really focus them on moving forward in terms of kind of an online presence for the students. I think the international schools in Japan were generally more used to using kind of technology. Mm-hmm. But I think in that scenario, with schools that had already been using quite a bit of technology, the idea of kind of blended models where, I think we all had with a long stint of, virtual classrooms, and one, realizing that we could do it and realizing that it worked, but also having a really good insight into the limitations to, like a full virtual setting. So I think my prediction would be that if schools will be much more prepared to look at kind of blended models of some things that you can do virtually and some things that you need to do face-to-face. So I think that will probably creep more and more into classes with, being able to have more flexible offerings for students into the future, I think, where, some things they can do, or, parts of courses virtually and others to be here. And probably workspaces as well. I think that'll be reflected within schools as well as workplaces. And definitely in the Japanese context, I'm not quite sure about other places, but that will be a big shift. Recruiting also, I think there has been a lot of kind of recruitment fairs, etc., in the international school market. I think the international recruiting will be much more heavily virtual, I think, in the future, and more accepting of that. And I think students have really, even, if we have my school, we have 3-year-olds through to the grade 12, so pre-K-12 schools. So we have our 3-year-olds doing their kind of PE lessons online and things like that. So normally, under normal circumstances, they wouldn't really have been having those experiences for quite some years, and never to that degree. So I think, a lot of that type of virtual presence, and for students who are away from school for a day or something, being able to kind of zoom in will change the shape of, I guess, practice for a while. So that's the main thing. But the other part, I guess, is a little bit of anxiety. I'm not quite sure how long that is going to take to, kind of collective anxiety about things in general, actually, and the effect of, the social media, etc., on students' mental health and everyone's mental health, actually. So I'm hoping that will ease. But I suspect the collective sense of anxiety, I guess, will linger with us for some time.
I think that is a topic that has been brought up, but actually not really been proactively discussed and also reviewed, how to support the mental well-being for everyone, isn't it? And it is true from all ages, right? The young, the students, the working class, the older generations. Everyone is affected because of this pandemic, and also at different stages of the pandemic, right? And the different anxiety. So I think this actually just going to build up, and over time it may be an issue that we all have to address. But as of now, I think the key is, as you say correctly, have empathy. I think you talk about caring lessons, right? Being caring for each other. And I think the empathy and the compassion, and by just being there and listening and helping, that will actually help all of us to pull through this period together and emerge strongly. But yeah, do take note of the mental health portion that we have to address, whether it's small or whichever status they're in. I think it's important that we are aware and be ready to support one another as we progress.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you for sharing that. That is really very insightful. I mean, we talk a lot about technology, blended learning. I think that is definitely a good way, mix of both, because at the end, I think we do need human touch as human beings, right? And everything online may not fulfill that need to engage and also be able to teach and support or guide the students more effectively. I think we talk about effectiveness of that programs that we put in. So I think blended learning, for sure. Recruitment, for sure. I think technology will play a huge part. And I think collective anxiety, as you say all correctly, this is an area we all have to watch out for. But thank you for sharing that, Damian.
Thank you.
Damian, going through all that you just gone through, and I think those are really very insightful and a lot of experiences there. What would your new normal be, Damian? Is there a new normal for yourself?
I guess, from a principal's perspective, so I guess one of my worries is, like I said before, and school systems have been kind of reluctant to change over the years, or a little bit impervious to change sometimes. So I'm hoping that some of our procedures will help us. We can hang on to them. Like, for example, the collaboration between it's called the JCAS Japan Council of International Schools, actually, group of heads of school. We've been meeting weekly via Zoom. So that type of, nationwide collaboration of kind of a like cluster of schools, I think, although I shouldn't use the word cluster, actually, somebody told me. So a like group of schools would be, really great to become the new normal. Even though we had sporadic, we had annual meetings, etc. So that ongoing support of each other and really kind of getting to know each other better and quite effectively actually through Zoom. I would like to carry on as a new normal in terms of me being an international school principal. With parents, I think hopefully the new normal is, judging by, many comments where parents, they did say it was kind of tough to have their, children at home for, such a long time. And also they were balancing work as well. So one of the comments that came through fairly consistently was that the parents found they were having a much better understanding of not only what the students were learning, but how they were learning. And even though it was an online process, they were getting a better sense of, I guess, the things that are important in the kind of teaching and learning environment that are, we try to foster at school. So I think that new normal, having, parents maybe understanding what, the learning environment of their children better, that would be a really positive outcome in this, quite disastrous kind of situation. But, if we could carry that through to one of the new normals, that would be really great. Like I mentioned before, I think that heightened sense of or levels of anxiety, I think will be normal for a while, unless we can go through a relatively long period without any more disasters. But even with the kind of the Black Lives Matters movement at the moment, and there'll be some sort of environmental disaster. So the other movements that there's a lot to be done in the world, I guess, and those movements are really positive in creating social change. But I think as we've seen particularly with social media, I think we'll continue to be bombarded with, really important messages, but also messages that, create heightened levels of anxiety. So I think the issue for us at schools, I guess, would be preparing students to be able to cope with that sort of information overload, I guess, in a way that's not going to adversely affect their mental health. They're all really important issues, and schools, I think, have a role in helping, children develop the skills necessary to not be kind of overwhelmed and have that kind of bombardment affecting them too badly. Because I think the horse has bolted in terms of the way that communication is kind of happening. But definitely schools have a role in helping us prepare ourselves for this new way of communicating that can be a little bit relentless and can affect our health, because it's so all-consuming, I guess, particularly now that many students are carrying devices pretty constantly during the day and night. So that again is, I think there's hopefully the new normal would be schools having a more concerted effort to help students deal with that type of information overload.
Yeah, definitely information overload, especially now over every form of media that we see, right? Even the traditional ones, you take up a piece of newspaper, that's it. First piece on the news are all being bombarded by all this news that we see day in, day out. So yeah, overwhelming of information, overload of information. How do we sift them through? How do we cope with them? I think those are all part of agility of the mindset that we talked about earlier, the growth mindset. How do we instill that in the students to be able to look things positively and move forward and be able to cope with all these unforeseen circumstances or changes that may take place over time. Well, thank you for sharing your new normal. I think that is really very insightful and very deep into those thought process you have. Thank you, Damian. Damian, the future generations will definitely benefit from this, and I would love to ask you, what would your messages be for the future generations?
I spoke before about profile of a caring learner, so I guess now I'd have two messages. One, look after each other, and the other one would be, look after the planet. And also over time, I think, coming to realize that those two things are in fact the same thing, which would be my kind of short version of the message. And with that in mind, I think for parents, schools have children for a part of the day, but the real kind of foundations of the way they come to know the world and the way that they build their kind of integrity is through conversations with the parents. So I would say my advice for future generations is for parents just to use those opportunities. These opportunities, kind of like COVID, are like the really serious social issues with the the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, and also kind of environmental issues that we had seen with the Greta Thunberg, and even before that Malala with gender equality. So all of those super important issues that need our attention and need us to kind of think and act really differently in a kind of collective sense. So I think all of those things that have potential to kind of cause us anxiety and cause us to kind of feel overwhelmed, but having those conversations with children about those in a way that kind of models the thinking that our children are going to need in the future. Modeling actually listening to someone, and modeling considering other people's perspectives, etc. Modeling gathering and evaluating some information, and that can all happen in the home with those conversations. And I think particularly now with people more and more distracted by kind of social media, sometimes those time for those conversations between the parents and the children are kind of becoming kind of more and more difficult to carve out of busy days. So that would be kind of my advice. With the big ideas about how do we look after each other and how do we look after the planet. Those two things being inextricably linked, really, and just for parents to think about how they want their child to think and have conversations with them that model that would probably be my advice. And that would help us out a lot at school too, because we're trying to do it, at least our version of this. But we don't sit down with the child at the dinner table each night, or, we don't go for a walk with the dog or whatever times that you can carve out. So those times are so important and much more important than anything that comes up with us in our day-to-day working lives, I believe. So that would be my message.
Well, thank you, Damian. I mean, that is so well said and well summarized concisely. I think you talk about looking after one another, looking after the planet is actually the same thing. At the end of the day, you're right. I mean, we are here as a community. We are all living on the planet Earth. So let's do whatever we can to help one another and save the planet at the same time. So in a nutshell. And I think what you said about parents' involvement, and also, of course, hand in hand with the schools and teachers while they're at school, like what we say, charity begins at home. I think what you're alluding to is that education begins at home. And this crisis that we're all going through put us in a situation where we are spending more time at home, less distraction in a sense. There's not much traveling needed, and literally at home 24/7. Yeah, spend that time to really cultivate that learning, and also all these core values like integrity you mentioned, about gender equality or inclusion and diversity. So I think those are really gold that we have to inculcate, and values that we inculcate in the child or in our children as they're growing up. Well, thank you, Damian, for sharing very insightful information, your word of wisdom, your experiences, and your vision as the education industry continues to shape and also transform itself. Damian, once again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate
thank you, Alyssa.
your sharing, and really a privilege having you in a SkyGem podcast episode. Thank you, Damian.
And thank you for being a great host.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode at SkyGems Academy Podcast Series 1 on the topic of how COVID-19 transformed the education industry. If you enjoyed today's episode and you love the vision and mission of SkyGems Academy, can you please help us to convince others to tune in to SkyGems Academy Podcast too? Please kindly subscribe to SkyGems Academy Podcast. Please also kindly leave a quick review and rate SkyGems Academy Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor.fm, Breaker, and various SkyGems Academy's podcast channels. That would mean the world to us, so thank you so much for your support. Visit our website at www.skygemsacademy.com to find out more about our distinguished speakers and about SkyGems Academy. We appreciate you and your continuous support. Thank you for tuning in to SkyGems Academy Podcast. High five and peace out!